So I'm going to start out with a risky proposition here. And that is, does anyone remember this commercial with the Life cereal back in the late 70s? No? Okay, I'll just, oh, there's a few. Okay, so back in the 70s, there was all these, you could buy all this sugary cereal, right? And you can still do that today. If you want to buy Fruit Loops at the store, you can buy Fruit Loops at the store. It's not the best for you, but you can do it. But there was this health kick, at least there was a health kick in my family, to buy more sort of, nutritious sort of things, including cereal. And one of the things, we were watching TV, and there's this cereal about life on TV. It's called Life cereal. And supposedly billed as a nutritious cereal. And nobody wants to eat it because, nutritious food, it just tastes bad. So they are sitting around the table, and all the kids are looking at the other kids and saying, who's going to eat this cereal, right? And then one kid says to the other one, saying, let Mikey do it, right? Does it ring a bell with people? Well, this is a presentation about Mikey having to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about V6 lessons learned and about what ARIN has done over the past. First, I'm going to give a little bit expanded talk in terms of what is going on with the ARIN and V4 depletion, so that you can see here where basically through the regional registries, 2 are exhausted. We're coming close, and I want to give a little bit more characterization on that, and also talk about the evolution of V6 at ARIN. So what has been our 2012 focus within ARIN? V4 depletion, V6 uptake. So it's one of the reasons why I'm here is, even though I talked about CGNs being here, really the whole purpose is actually moving forward to V6. And that we're going to go through a rather ugly transition going on the road to V6. But the big thing is, what are we going to do in the meantime, right? And so ARIN has actually put out a V4 depletion plan. What our plan is as a staff going forward, how to handle things as they deplete. One of the things that ARIN has done in the past, and I'm not sure about LACNIC, is like if you come in and ask us for space, you had at one point 90 days to pay. With this, that's a lot of time. And it's not a lot of money, but that was the policy as it was first set out. So as we were getting into this depletion plan, that time to pay becomes shorter. And if you don't pay within that window, that address space is returned to the free pool and could be given to someone else. So that's one of the things that ARIN is doing. The other thing is actually looking at in more earnest detail about V4 transfers. I'm going to talk about that as well a little bit later. We're also doing a lot more things online with ARIN Online. So there's ARIN as one of the sort of, in some sense, the original registry. It was actually part of the internet back in the day, back in the 90s. And it was all based on everything that you wanted to, when you wanted to actually communicate with the registry, you did it with templates. That was so 1970s. And ARIN really never got out of that phase until the last couple of years, where we can actually do things on the web. And we're continuing to do that. One of the things that we're actually doing is starting to add new services in that. We're going to talk, you heard some things about RPKI. Who was here for the RPKI stuff yesterday? Okay, who understands RPKI? Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, see if you really truly understand it. What I'm going to do is not really explain it. I'm going to say why people really need this. Aside from route security, there's another reason, and continued participation in internet governance forums. So, people know what's going on within the internet's governance arena about the ITU. Was that discussed yesterday too? Okay. So I won't go into that very much at all. Public-facing development efforts. RPKI. So RPKI is this cryptographic system. And the big thing to take out of this is one is a bootstrap for routing security. Routing right now is routing by rumor. So if you're in the banking industry or someplace else, and especially if you're not part of sort of you're within country doing business, really dealing with commerce over the internet is kind of scary. And there's not, who's heard about the YouTube attack? Okay, and that was explained too, okay. We could kind of interpolate that. That was one of the ones that was actually made public. There's plenty of others that have not been made public. And you can think about this in terms of how easy it is for you to be confused on making sure you go to the right site. Just think about actually doing most of the right things, but ending up not going to the right site because of route subversion. And RPKI actually helps. It's the first part of that. There's another part of RPKI, and people say, okay, that's why we're doing RPKI. The real reason why this was actually created in the first place was to do some sort of attestation that you actually hold that space because of all this pressure that's going to go on the V4. And this has been going on for a long time. So what you really wanted to do, so when you buy a piece of land, what do you get back? A deed, that's right. You usually have a loan associated with it, right? You have to pay for it. But you have a deed, and that tells your government that, hey, I own that piece of land. At least I hold it, and the bank owns it. But you have that piece of land, and that deed is registered within the county records. Now, anyone can take a look at it, but that deed is registered there, and you can actually, you have some sort of way of actually saying, yes, who owns this? It's a question. You go to the government, and they take a look-see. That concept has not really been part of the internet. We kind of have this quasi sort of thing going on with registering getting your information from a regional registry. It's registered in our database, but there's no security authentication with that. And that's the real reason why RPKI was there. The bootstrapping was done afterwards, saying, hey, this is really cool. We can bootstrap secure routing on top of this. But the big thing was to say, hey, I'm really the holder of this particular IP space. And this makes a lot of sense, especially as we deal with this run out and the pressure going with V4. Does that make sense? No? Yes? No? It doesn't make sense? Okay. Should I go a little bit further on that? You want an example? Okay. So there's a particular small site that occasionally gets a part of the internet. Comes on and off. He doesn't have a lot of money. It's to say he sells some sort of widget. And when he has enough money, he brings this site online. He has a /24 Class C, in the old lingo. And he comes on and off, and when he has the opportunity, he's on the internet, and people go to his website. When he doesn't have his money, his internet site gets turned off, and it's just not on the internet anymore. Some enterprising young man someplace else says, that IP address space is not used right now, so I'm going to advertise it. So he sets up his own site and starts doing his own business with that same set of IP addresses. Now, routing going on the internet as it is today is routing by rumor. Basically, your ISP actually takes that route and pushes it along the path to the very core of the internet. All those things are done by rumor. Hey, this guy has this route. Go ahead and send it over here. Oh, okay, I got this route. I'll send it over there. The authentication that occurs there is non-existent. It's all based on, we have some sort of trust, but I'm not sure about that trust. And as things get more pressurized, that trust is going to go further away, right? So if you can think about it that way, hey, this enterprising young man came and took that space that really belonged to this other partner, this other party, and the only reason that party's not on the internet is because he couldn't pay his bills. But once he does, he'll try to get on. And when he does, what happens? It's really confusing, right? Some people might be able to go to his site, some people might go to the other site, and that business, and both parties in that case, is really, there's confusion. And the last thing we really want is confusion on the internet. We want a particular IP address to go to one site or to one enterprise. Is that right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the whole block.
The whole block?
Yeah. Everything within a block has to go to right there.
Yep, the block has to go to the right area. You're absolutely right. So there's two forms of RPKI. One is hosted, where we'll do all your crypto magic for you. and Lactic also has the same system set up right now, both in production. The other one is delegated, where if you want to do the whole delegated model yourself, where you handle all the RPKI, all the certificates and underneath it, we can actually have it interchanged underneath. It's very complicated, but it's doable. So here's our current v4 inventory. This is as of last week. We had 2.87/8s left. So you say, wow, ARIN still has some space. Still got to go for a long time. Well, within ARIN, we know that there's a number of ISPs that have a large amount of space. We know a number of those ISPs actually are qualified to get a large amount of space from us. This could be gone tomorrow if they just put in the request. They haven't done so, but if they do, we're going to be out in no time flat. So studies say that ARIN will exhaust in 2013. Whether or not that's really true depends on those large ISPs in the ARIN region that could come to us. So we may exhaust before then. In fact, we're going to exhaust before APNIC and RIPE, because one of the things that Chris mentioned that we don't have that the other two regional registries that have officially exhausted have is some sort of policy dealing with that last /8. They say within their policy on their last /8, hey, you can come to us and get /22 and you can keep on going. ARIN has no such policy, so we're going to go down to 0. And there's always going to be space available, but it depends on who returns, who doesn't pay their bills, that sort of thing. So things are going to be different. In terms of phases, I talked a little bit earlier that ARIN has a run-out plan, a depletion plan. We're in phase 2 of a four-part plan right now, and it's mostly dealing with billing. Now here's a revealing statistic. This is V4 only customers. Almost 2/3 are V4 only. V6 only is a small part, and V6 and V4 is just basically a third. But what this says here is ARIN has a policy that if you have V4 space, you can get V6 space, basically, no questions asked. So just come to us. But a large number of the ISPs and sites have not done so today. So we have to continue this whole sort of, this all going forward. We've got to make this happen where we have to get more people to V6, because everything's going to get really ugly unless we move to V6 very quickly. Here are the number of organizations that are served by ARIN, 35,000. What's interesting on this slide is the legacy space. Legacy space is what was given out by INTERNIC, the organizations that were put in place before ARIN was put into existence. INTERNIC, Network, and then the DoD NIC before that. And they gave out huge amounts of space. So because the internet back in those days was very small and just a few number of organizations connected to it. So the early adopters were able to get a large amount of space. People like MIT getting a /8, right? And they still have it today. SRI had a /8. A large number of the people that actually started the internet had got a large amount of space when they asked for it. And at that point, it's like, yeah, it looks like you qualified and you get it. And that has since changed. It's a lot more, there's a lot more sort of analysis being done on the space, but back in those days it wasn't so much. Here's an interesting slide, and this is the number of transfers that have been completed in ARIN's region. And what I'm showing this is that even though there's space available, people rather pay for it. I don't know why, but they do. And this is sort of an interesting slide in that there is a marketplace, and there wasn't one before. And it's called the Specified Transfer Listing Service. It's a voluntary listing service. It has a different nomenclature. So a lister is basically the one who's actually saying, hey, I got something for sale. The seeker is saying, hey, I got something I want to buy. So, and the facilitator is essentially the broker. Now, I don't understand, because usually when you buy a house, you have a broker who you work through to buy the house, right? You have a seller who,
wants to buy it.
Yeah, and you have a purchaser who wants to,
That's right.
So we have a different nomenclature, but that's just the way it is. Yes?
how is that done over different parts of the world? Let's say you're in the Atlantic, someone is a listener, and someone in South Africa wants to buy. Is that possible or not?
So this is dealing with only within the ARIN region.
Okay.
Okay. And one of the things I haven't made clear, I probably should make clear, is that the seeker, or the purchaser in this case, needs to qualify for that space before they receive it. Okay. So there is some policy behind there. So what doesn't occur is that you don't get these hoarders, right? These people that have a huge amount of money and want to basically capture the market. We're stopping that by policy. So now I'm going to talk about why Mikey made me do it. So let's go ahead and talk about V6. Any questions about what's going on within the ARIN region?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I remember 2 years ago when we were in Mexico with the Atlantic, and there was talk about questions about if the excess amount that were being recovered by ARIN, if this was going to be pulled back into IANA and then divided equally. What happened to that talk? What actually took place?
Okay, so essentially that's dealing with the legacy space.
Yes. Right.
Okay. That is still under consideration.
Yeah, 2 years later.
Yeah. So.
That can alleviate the streets for APNIC and Europe, for Europe, no?
Well, actually what's interesting about this is the early adopters that are in this legacy sort of segment, there's only really 2 areas that it really affected. Mainly ARIN and a little bit to a lesser degree RIPE.
Right, that's a good one.
So, and RIPE has this, they've come to an agreement, I believe, with their legacy holders. So they have the things under in control, you can say. Within the ARIN's region, what's this legacy space, a lot of these people, there's no sort of agreement made between them and the regional in the registry. So they're kind of just floating there.
Okay.
And it's because things back in the day were done by handshakes, much like routing is done today.
That's right. So there was no agreement in actually pushing them up and then let IANA divide them back again amongst different IRs.
That again, it's under consideration right now, and it's really kind of a hot potato.
It's a hot potato, right?
It's a hot potato. Yeah. Go ahead.
We can pass the third proposal to allow man in that count.
Yeah, so actually, Chris is bringing up some interesting things. So I should also mention a couple things about the regional registries, ARIN in particular. One is, we're kind of like an executor, right? So what we do is we don't make the rules. We just execute them. The ARIN Advisory Council, Chris is which a member, actually sets the policies in which we go ahead and follow. And there's a couple of them that have come up in the recent past that are fairly interesting. One is that we can actually hand space back to IANA. There was no policy put in place.
That's right.
So there's now a policy in place that we can actually give space back to IANA.
That's right.
And that is something that was agreed to by all the regional registries, which is quite a feat given that we're all kind of divergent.
Yeah.
And there was another one too, right? No, come here.
Yeah, so that debate, it started, the original policy proposal required that all the registries hand back all space they got returned to them to IANA, and then IANA would redistribute it out to the world, right? And many of the registries didn't see that as necessarily actually, equal distribution didn't actually end up being fair because growth is happening at different rates, right? The APNIC region is consuming that just as much faster than anyone else. So then there was a second policy proposal kind of fired back towards that, just, allow for it to be returned. That kind of got fizzled because I think those two kind of just canceled each other out. And there was a third policy that ended up coming through, that's the one that got passed, that Mark was just talking about, which allows for the return of space to IANA. And IANA then is able to break that up and hand it out smaller than /8s, and there's a procedure there for breaking it up and handing it out to all the 5 registries. And after that happened, ARIN actually returned the greater part of the /8 that was the interop return space, which had been kind of sitting in limbo. So ARIN did return that, even though it wasn't mandatory, once there was a way to do it.
Okay, good.
So I think that is settled.
So that did take place.
So that part's settled, but the legacy issue that you're alluding to in terms of what is happening to all these entangling references out there, essentially, That's not solved yet.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for
I think
answering.
that's good enough. I think we kind of slammed that one. The rest of y'all probably sleep.
Actually, if you,
Oops,
for
maybe
those
not.
who are interested in that, right now there's an open consultation from IANA about how this return space is going to be handled and how it's going to be registered. So if you want to take a look at it, I would highly recommend that.
Should be.
So now I'm like the second speaker of the day, right? After lunch, everyone's getting really tired and really sleepy, including me up here. And now I'm going to show you some network diagrams. So please bear with me as I go through this. Oh, so any networker guys here in the audience? I know there's a few. Okay. All right. Oh, I should probably ask. How many people are here involved with policy? Okay. I guess that includes legal, doesn't it? Now, and how many of you? All right. Engineers rock. All right. All right. So let's go through this. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because, again, this shows some of the basically some of the scars that have occurred over the last couple of years on dealing with P6 deployment. So anyways, what I'd like to do is first start talking about the timeline of these things. And one of the things I want to sort of stress is this whole idea of V4 runout is not a recent phenomenon, right? So this has started up way in the past. When I first started working in this industry, which was 1991, that kind of shows my age, one of the things that they were worrying about then is this whole idea of running out of Class B space. Do you know what Class B space is? Okay, a /16, right? Okay. So back in those days, you can get one of three types. You can get apples or oranges or grapes. So the apples were the /8s, the oranges were the /16s, and the grapes were the /24s. Well, most people didn't like the grapes, right? They wanted the oranges. So they all went for /16s. That made a huge run on /16s, and people said, oh my gosh, we're running out, we've got to do something. And so the internet engineers at that point did a pivot, and was really quick in terms of doing a pivot back in those days of we're going to create this thing called CIDR, basically classless interdomain routing. And that's the way that regional registries now hand out that space. About the same time, they said, oh my gosh, we're going to run out of IPv4 addresses. I know we're small. At that point, the internet was really small. In fact, my wife, I was working like 18 hours a day at that point in my life. It was crazy. 6 days a week, and I would spend my nights working on a billing system for Network Solutions, the company that ran the internet back in then. And so we're sitting in front of the TV, and one of the things that came across this TV was all of a sudden there was a car advertisement ad that showed up during the news. Yeah, I know I'm really boring watching the news. And then what was interesting, at the end of the advertisement, they had a URL. And I said, oh my gosh. And my wife's name's Lisa. I said, Lisa, there's a URL to a website. It ends in .com. That's for the company I work for. And she goes, what? Is that what you do? So, and now I come home and I look around, and all my kids, they're getting a little bit older now, all my kids, everyone's tapping around on their computers, right? So everybody is, staring down at their screen, and now I hear, instead of coming home saying, why are you late for dinner, they're saying, why is the internet down? So the internet has come a long way too. I mean, not only did my family come a long way, so has the internet. But the take home in all this is V6 isn't done yet. And we have there's a lot of things that have occurred. It's ready for deployment. There's a lot of things that need to come up, much like they did with V4. There's still improvements going on with V4, even though we're almost out. So this gives you a sort of a timeline on how things go on. Now, when ARIN first started out, we said, okay, we got this idea. Hey, we really got to start moving with V6. Let's go ahead and start eating our own dog food. And at that point, the V6 was just people were kind of doing it. Large ISPs were kind of doing it, but it was all handshakes. It's all knowing the routing engineer, the lead routing engineer for that particular company. And in 2003, Sprint put out V6 using tunnels. And we said, hey, we'd love to be a part of this. And so we had set up a T1 with Sprint. Actually had this T1 until about 2 years ago. It was set up with a Linux router with a Sangoma T1 card. I don't even know if they're still in existence anymore. With an open BSD firewall, because at that point that was the only firewall that actually supported V6. And we had web, DNS, and FTP servers. There was no dual stack. We thought, hey, look, we're starting up this whole thing. We have no idea the security implications, so we're going to set up our own segregated V6 network. So that meant we had to replicate data from this side of the network to that side of the network, and so on. It didn't work too great because if you're working with tunnels, and that was one of the transitions mechanisms that Christian talked about earlier. One of the bigger issues with tunnels is, well, one, you don't really know where you're really going. Have you ever followed traceroute? I know there's a bunch of engineers here. Who's used traceroute? Oh, right. So traceroute shows you your path of where you go, right? Yeah, which routers I'm going through and saying, so I'm going through Miami out to the Netherlands or something like that, right? So if you have a tunnel in place, actually this is a trick that they used years ago. So if you put a tunnel in place, you can hide all those intermediate hops, right? So I say, hey, if I put a tunnel here to the point C over here, I can totally hide the whole thing the whole physical layer that you're actually going through B, right? So you just see, well, there's quite a bit of latency here. It takes a long time for this packet to go from A to C, but it looks like a single hop. So hey, it just must be a long circuit, So, but the other issues with it is that as you go through these networks and you have tunnels in place, each of these guys could have different MTUs, maximum transmission units underneath. And what they do is if your packet's too big for that transmission unit, it has to fragment it, right? Go back to the sender. And things were really kind of creaky and broken, and tunnels at that point just didn't work very well. So basically, the service was available, but not very available back in those days. 2004, who's heard of this guy named Vint Cerf? Okay, so Vint Cerf, at least in the States, is known as sort of the grandfather of the internet. And he's a very, very famous guy on TV occasionally. He was at WorldCom. He's actually now on our board. He came to us and said, hey, we've got this new V6 service. Would you like to try it, ARIN? Because we hear that you want to run V6. And we said, sure, we'll go ahead and run it. It was better. Not trying to degrade Sprint on what they did before, because they were one of the first sort of adopters in doing everything over tunnels. This was native. And again, the big take home on this is we segregated everything. We segregated our stacks. But V4 was on one side, V6 was on the other. Again, we still ran into MTU issues and routing issues and so on. In 2006, we went ahead and made a pretty dramatic change in that we decided to go to an exchange that was based at a colo facility near our site. ARIN's headquarters is in Chantilly, Virginia. There's a large colo site that's in Ashburn. So there's a huge presence by Amazon there. All the major ISPs actually locate there. So what we did is there was an exchange that was just starting up within Equinix, and we joined the Equinix exchange, great name. And again, we had a segregated network, and we went ahead and set up V6 there. We started doing some dual stack at that point. I came aboard and said, let's go ahead and change things up, mix things up here a little bit. And let's kind of, this whole idea of segregated networks, this is craziness. Let's go ahead and dual stack everything, and let's run a uniform network underneath. essentially for the operations guys, this made their lives really easy, to a certain degree. So we went ahead and set up the network, and I see here that we have Brocade load balancers, V6 support. It was very beta, so we were definitely we were eating their very early code, and it was tough. We had DNS, who is Internet Routing Registry, World Wide Web, Jabber, you name it, we got it on V6. One of the other things we did is, not only did we subject ourselves to this, we subjected others to V6. When we set up our V6, since 2005, we enabled V6 at all our meeting locations. So ARIN has 2 member meetings a year, and during that time, we go ahead and set up V6 so people could go ahead and play with V6. Most of the time, we set up tunnels coming back to our office and out to the internet. But when we did this, we did various types of transition mechanisms underneath. To, 1, for us to experiment ourselves, and 2, to let other people see how they ran V6 themselves. And basically one of the things that we're trying to do is show these people, hey, this can be done, go ahead and play with it. Yes, there are things that need to be broken, please lean on your vendors. That was basically our message at that point. So we talked about various transition technologies, NATPT, CGN, NAT Lite, which is another one out there, IPI, which is done by the Chinese, I think. And there was plenty of training opportunities for all of it out there. I wish that we had V6 here. It would have been fun to go ahead and shut down V4 and turn on V6 and see how many people have any issues. Actually, one of the interesting things, when you come to one of these meetings, you guys are a little bit different than everybody else. And most of the time you come to these tech meetings, everyone has their own laptops, right? And so you're giving a talk and everyone's really buried down. And the only time you know that you actually got their attention is, 1, if you actually say something funny, or the internet doesn't work. So I see most of you don't have your laptops here, so I guess it's different. So here you can go ahead and see the V6 timeline, that recast it again. What I'd like to talk about now, as I conclude, is sort of our current challenges. We're dual stacked over everything. So we run V6 not only in public interfaces, but we also run it internally. So everything we have has a V6 interface when possible. We do have vendors that are V4 only. Our CEO actually put out a letter to them saying, hey, look, if you want to do business with us in the future, you've got to have V6. Now, what's interesting about that also went to our payroll vendor. That kind of surprised our payroll vendor. Actually, it kind of worried me. Frankly, I kind of like to be paid. So anyways, that's definitely an issue ongoing. So we've also had challenges with our VPN. We use OpenVPN as our way to get into our network. One of the interfaces works off of V6. One does not. There's TAP and TUN, and TAP works and TUN doesn't. I don't quite understand why. There's middleware boxes that are put in, that you have in your network. Things like load balancers. There's DDoS mitigation tools, that sort of thing. They have to run over both V4 and V6. Vendors claim they support V6, but in some cases they do, in some cases they don't. And it's usually on dealing with feature sets around both that you really, really like that are on V4, but aren't quite ready on V6. I'll give you an example. Our load balancer that we have, I want to bring out 3 new features on it. 2 of them are on one mode, and 1 is on the other. So I had to be like Solomon. I had to split the baby in the middle and say, okay, well, I didn't really split the baby in the middle, but I had to do those 2 features, and I certainly would have liked the 3rd as well. So it's one of those things that we continually work with vendors, even in these mature days. And the more of you that lean in on your vendors, the better off we'll be as a community as we go forward. Because V6 is the only way. If you want to join, I know we're not in the ARIN region, but if you want to come to an ARIN meeting, we're having one in Dallas here in a couple weeks, and we're also going to be in Barbados here in the upcoming spring. So So, and that's where the policies are all discussed, and occasionally I get to roll out to the community new features we're putting out within engineering. So, any questions?
Just one question for you.
Yeah.
I actually know the answer, but I want you to say it out loud. Do ARIN staff develop policy for ARIN?
No.
Yeah.
ARIN staff does not develop policy. We may give suggestions, but we do not develop policy.
And so that's why you had Chris come up, because he knows the policy process, right?
That's correct.
So it's important to know in the governance of ARIN in the region, it's the companies and the participants that create the policy, not the staff. The staff are neutral. So that's key as far as the regional internet registry, and I think Carlos is the same in LACNIC. Yeah. It's in all the RARs. The staff don't create the policies. It's the users, the companies, the research networks who create the policies. And governments participate, but governments don't rule. It's anyone and everyone together working together. So it's not just one group that has the only say.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll just kind of add on to that is the staff's suggestions come through a policy experience report in terms of things that are looked upon as these could be improvements if the advisory council wants to bring it on. But everyone has a role within these meetings. So if you see things that you think are outwardly just wrong, and through policy, you're more than welcome to come and state your case and see if you get the community to follow you. So, any other questions?